Hi everyone, and welcome to Unit 3, Part A. We're breaking it in two parts, and the first part is going to be all about categorical data, and then the second part will be about numerical data. Now, we've already talked about both of those things, but today we're going to be spending a lot of our time talking about associations, and if you want to add something to this title page, maybe association is an equivalent to relationship. So we're going to be looking at relationships or associations in categorical data. All right, we're going to just kick it off. Let's go ahead to the next page. So what is a relationship? So associations and relationships are the same thing, and that is when one certain value of one variable occurs in common with another. So I don't know, maybe you're talking about the variable of weather, and that's a categorical variable. It could be sunny, it could be stormy, and then maybe we're talking about another variable of just place that you eat for dinner, right? Maybe the weather has a role in where you go out to eat. I don't know, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And so we can say that our variables are going to be two types from our first unit. Either we'll be talking about quantitative data, which is numerical data. This is what we will be doing in Unit 3B. Or we'll be talking about qualitative data. And that is the same thing as categorical data. And that's what we're going to be focusing in this first part. All right. And whenever we're looking at variables and trying to see if, does weather type explain or predict where people eat dinner, one of those is going to be the explanatory variable. And we're going to say that that is the independent variable. And then the other one is going to be the response variable, and that's going to be our dependent variable. And I'm sure you've seen this in science with independent and dependent variables, but if you kind of had a chart and you were looking at the relationship kind of between two things, we know that the explanatory variable would be on the x-axis, explanatory variable, and then the response variable, would be measured on the y-axis. So again, down here would be your independent variable, and over here would be your dependent variable. And we're kind of looking about how those relate. Awesome. So again, an easy way to remember that, especially if you're looking at the x and explanatory, that'll help you to remind yourself that we're talking about the x-axis. And the why we would care about these is we're always looking, when we're curious about a relationship, we're always looking to see if the explanatory variable explains / predicts the response variable. So if there's an association, we say that the explanatory explains or predicts the response. So again, if we're looking at the variable of weather, we could say, hey, does the weather explain or predict where people go to eat? And the thing is depending on what you care about, either variable could be either or. It just depends. Maybe you want to look, does where you go to eat explain or predict the weather for that day? I don't think that one makes as much sense, but just depending on what you want to do is how you would word that. Okay, so again, that just depends on the intent of the study or what you're trying to figure out. All right, and then sometimes you might not be exactly sure of what the explanatory or response variable are. If you're just reading a study, sometimes they're not assigned, but most of the time in our class, they definitely will be. All right, let's give this a read. Number 1 says, if I can grab a pencil, it says, scientists drove 80 different cars at different speeds, and they measured the stopping distance to determine if they could predict. So what are we trying to predict? We're trying to predict the stopping distance based on speed. So here we have to find out what is the explanatory variable and what is the response variable. Well, I'm trying to figure out, does speed explain or predict the stopping distance on a car? And if you think about it, there probably is a relationship. The faster you're going, the longer it probably takes to stop, right? The slower you're going, the sooner it probably takes to stop, right? How about this one? Number 2, it says, in a crash, does the length of a skid mark from the tires tell us how fast the car was going? So does the length of a skid mark explain or predict how fast the thing is going? So I would say the explanatory variable is the length of the skid mark, and that could explain or predict how fast they're going. And I'm sure they do that with car accidents. There actually is a relationship between those ones. So people do measure the skid marks at different accident sites, and they can try to predict how fast the car was going at that time. Number 3 says, is there a relationship between gender and political party? And based off of how that question is wording, or the information that we're given there, it's not really telling you which one is which. Now you could pose the question, does gender explain or predict political party? Or does political party explain or predict gender? In that case, you could assign them, but based off that question, you really couldn't tell. All right, but here's just an important thing for this unit to keep track of, because we will come back to this with experiments later. But just because there isn't a relationship or an association between two variables does not mean that there is a causal relationship. Okay, and so association does not imply causation. So I'm sure if you've taken a psychology class, you've definitely heard this, and this just is very important. Whenever we see a relationship, we're going to be thinking tends to, right? Whenever we see relationship, we're going to think tends to, because it does, just because it seems that, oh my goodness, it's rainy, and when it's rainy, people seem to stay home and eat dinner. Or, oh my gosh, it was sunny and people seem to go out. I mean, those are just things that you're noticing. You didn't actually prove anything. So just be careful on the way that we word those. And so this unit, that's all we're looking at for today. And we'll try another kind of topic here in a second. See ya.